Let me do the thing. Go live. That's checking. All right. Hello. This is Emacs Chat 21 coming back after a decade of not doing it or so. And today I've got Amin Bandali, who's I know for like, is it 7 years now that we've been doing Emacs Conf together?
I think so, yeah, since fall 2019.
Yeah. But of course, you also do a whole lot of other things. I was looking through your Emacs configuration, and there's like translation and other stuff in there. So, would you like to start off with a brief introduction of who you are and how and why you use Emacs?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, first of all, hello everyone. Sorry if I'm looking to the site. This is a new setup. My laptop, which is my has my webcam, is there, but my main display is here. So I might be looking to the side from time to time. But yeah, that aside, hello. Yeah, I'm Amin Bandali. I've been, I think, using Emacs since 2014 or 15. So I guess more than a decade now. And I'm a software engineer by day, or software developer slash programmer slash computing scientist. And then, yeah, I'm also a free software activist. So I volunteer in a lot of kind of free software projects as well, which Sasha kind of mentioned. So I do things around GNU. I volunteer with FSF. I'm a Debian developer, so I try to maintain some packages in Debian. I try to help run Emacs Conf from time to time. Hopefully this year I will be much more present. But yeah, that's that. So I first got into using Emacs, I guess, as a programmer tool, like as a text editor. But I've since then kind of integrated it into a lot of other aspects of my life, and I do much more with it, as I'm sure a lot of us do. Yeah, so I use it for kind of note taking, just any writing, editing purposes, in multiple natural and programming languages. Yeah, reading and sending email, for chatting, via IRC, all of that good stuff.
And this is the sort of thing that isn't immediately obvious from your configuration. I know you've got your GNU setup in there and you've got your ERC setup in there, but sometimes when newcomers are trying to figure out, okay, there are all these packages, but how do I use them to get stuff done? That's one of the reasons why we want to do this Emacs chat, so that maybe you can show us some of the cool stuff. We are live, but if you accidentally show something personal, let me know and I can kill the stream within 10 seconds. And I think then we can be like, okay, we'll just flush that out and then come back once we've hidden the, top secret plans for taking over the world, that sort of thing. So yeah,
Sounds good.
where do we want to start?
I'm happy to do it however you like. I can either share my screen, pull up my configuration. Yeah, okay, so let's do that.
Yeah. If you
Let's
share your
see.
screen, sometimes I think what we did ages ago was we just started walking through the configuration, and then sometimes people would say, "Oh yeah, that's really interesting. Let's go and demonstrate that so that people can get a sense of how this actually works." And there were some things in your configuration that I had no idea, like what is FFS? How does that? There's like no package. Like I couldn't find any information about it. But yeah, so your config. If you want to go ahead and share your screen while I fill the air with hand waving. So
Okay.
admin's config tends to be more on the minimalist side, and so I think you mostly rely on built-in things with a couple of external packages. You don't even use package at all. It's just with it's all like run at idle time to delay the startup of various things, and then it's all like
Yeah.
just vanilla Emacs as you can get for loading and configuring things.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. So before I continue, quick note, Sasha, if you can make me presenter, because I don't have
Oh,
access to share
oh,
my screen.
that
Right.
would that would be important. Yes. Hang on a second. Let me see.
Um,
Okay, here we go. Make presenter. I might as well promote you to moderator while we're at it. There you go. You should now have the
okay, all good.
magic powers.
Thanks. Let's see.
It's a good thing we're practicing this before Emacs Conf, so I can remember how all this stuff
Yep.
works.
Yep, for sure. Okay, let's see. I think I got it now. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, excellent. Let's see. Uh, Okay. Yeah, so as Sasha mentioned, at the moment, my config is kind of very minimalist and kind of conservative, like by design, in part because I tend to like work on a lot of different machines, whether it's for work or volunteering or whatever, and I prefer to use Emacs if I can. So I want my config to be fairly like self-contained, so I can easily like either git clone or like rsync it over. Yeah, and to like keep it simple, like I was using package.el for a while for installing and managing my packages, which I don't keep in my configs repository, but then I decided to switch over to like very like manual package management with the awesome new feature user-lisp-directory of the next upcoming Emacs release, which basically you can give it a subdirectory in your .emacs.d or like .config/emacs, and then it'll go through all the Emacs list files recursively, byte compile them, native compile them, all that good stuff, and add them to the load path. And for people who are using existing or older releases of Emacs, there's also site-lisp by Philip Kaludercic, which is kind of the I guess first implementation of what later became user-lisp and built into Emacs. So you can make it conditional and fall back to site-lisp if you want to be able to use that, use user-lisp on older Emacs but still have your configuration be usable. Yeah, anyway. So I've kind of experimented with like a couple different ways of managing my configurations, like single giant init file of like 4,000 or 5,000 lines, which I know is actually not very large by comparison to, I think, like someone like Sasha's configuration. And also like, into like split into multiple different files, which has its own benefits. And I've kind of actually converged to the approach that Prot uses. If you actually take a look at my configuration file, you see I've drawn a lot of inspiration from Prots, which is having a literate or file, like single file configuration, which then all of the Emacs Lisp source blocks get tangled to individual files. So I can maintain a single source of truth and like maintain it, edit it in all in one place, but then also easily be able to share individual pieces to like people if they want. So yeah, that's kind of the general approach. And I can like dive right in.
Yeah, that's definitely the structure that I've also stolen from Prod, and I like the way that your headings names are all long and descriptive, and you've got all the everything broken down in detail. So yeah, go ahead and walk us through it, please.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. So that's a brief introduction, and then I have an early-init section for like doing the early-init file. There's a couple of subheadings here. Actually, let me enlarge the font size a little bit to make it more legible. Okay, great. Yeah, so I do a couple of things here, like disabling package at startup because I don't use package, as I mentioned. I manually like install and update my packages as like Git submodules in my configurations repository. I set like load prefer newer to T to like make sure that I never load any stale code. Like for example, I might edit some Emacs Lisp file by hand and like forget to byte compile or native compile it. And this tells Emacs to basically just use the version of like these three variants that's like the most recent. Yeah, nothing super fancy here. I turn off a couple of things that I find like a little bit distracting, like the menu bar or toolbar. Although I do say here that like for people who are new to Emacs, they're actually super helpful. Like, sure, it's a little bit of visual clutter, but in the beginning, it's really, really helpful to like help you like orient yourself of like what mode you're in, what tools do you have available in your disposal. And I even someone who's been using Emacs for more than 10 years, I also use it sometimes when I'm like just starting to use a new mode. So yeah, good stuff.
I was very amused by the comment on the "I don't like getting jump scared out of my chair." You turned off Bell.
Yeah, because that actually used to happen when I first started using Emacs. Like when I don't know, I don't even remember when it bells or rings, but maybe if you like quit like with Control G or like try to backspace into like delete where there's no more characters to delete, so it rings a bell and it's very like can be jarring. So yeah, I turned that off.
Yeah, and then you've got a
Yeah.
whole bunch of things where you set some variables to nil temporarily to make it faster. So that's in your startup and garbage collection.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is kind of like empirically, there's no like hard and fast like science behind this, but yeah, I experimented over the years and I'm pretty sure. I believe the default, for example, the garbage collection cons threshold is about like 8 MB, and I tried like increasing that a little bit to see how much. Like if I increase it to what point will it be like will it make my startup faster? And I found this like 30 MB or maybe bytes to be kind of a sweet spot. So I bumped that up, and then after Emacs is finished like initializing, in the after init hook, I just restore the defaults. Yeah. And then, yeah, this is the bit with like the user list directory that I was talking about. Awesome stuff. So you can basically designate the directory. For example, in my configuration, it's just the Lisp directory. And then on startup, Emacs will go through and like byte compile, native compile if necessary, and then like add all of that stuff to the load path automatically. So you get that. Yeah, and then this is the bit about site-lisp that I was talking about. So if you want to use user-lisp, but you're still using older Emacs versions, then you need to maintain backward compatibility in your config. This is how you do it, for example. So you just yeah, add it to load path, require it, and then call prepare user-lisp. That's about it.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's kind of like, yeah.
Oh, I'm picking up that tip about using the ignore directories. I'm getting by with just ignoring all of the byte compilation output, but it would be nice to just say, that stuff is test. I don't need to worry about it. Good stuff.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, I was also doing that. I actually have it as a comment, like to like suppress like warning types like byte compilation. But I was like, I still like I plan on like working on some packages, like whether my own or others, and it would still be helpful to get those warnings. So I keep them enabled. It's still a bit annoying. I still get some of them when I launch Emacs, but I don't like restart or launch Emacs as frequently. So it's pretty bearable. Yeah. Yeah, and then I have like the main like init file, and there's not much in it. It's just the debug on error and debug on quit. So the debug on error thing, I set it to like the value of init-file-debug. And if we look at that, the help for this variable, basically, if you like pass or launch Emacs with --debug-init, this variable will be true. So yeah. Let's see.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, it's pretty helpful. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I took this from John Weagley's .emacs, but I can't remember for sure. It's been years. Yeah, it's pretty nice. Yeah, and then here I just set my name and email address, and very early I, set a custom like file to like keep all of that stuff separate from my .emacs. I don't want it mixing in. Yeah, and then pretty much the only other thing that's in my main init file is just to require and load these different like modules or packages of my configuration. Yeah, so I have these as like actual packages or like as actual features, like they provide themselves. And that's just something that I found like straightforward enough to do. I know, for example, Prot uses like a dual approach of he has like some of his configuration that's like more readily usable, available as actual packages. And then the other ones, it's just like Emacs Lisp code. It's not actual packages. So yeah, but for me, I just keep it simple, everything as packages, and that's about that.
Fantastic. Let's dive into some of those configuration modules.
Sure. Let's see. Yeah, so there's this like core thing which is kind of gets included in all of my other files. I wrote a like bandali-configure macro, kind of shamelessly based on like prot emacs configure, which is what prot uses, and it basically is a way of kind of similar to use package for like wrapping a bunch of relevant like Emacs Lisp code all together. And it has the benefit, like if you use it, then if there is an error in that like block or in the body, basically, then it won't like crash everything. Like that body will just get ignored, and like we like display an error. And that's also the main reason that prot uses it. The one thing that I added extra to mine, which I took with like inspiration from Echelle Yaron's ESY like /init step, is to wrap it up in basically time the execution of each of these blocks, which can be pretty helpful to like help you see, okay, which part of like my configuration is particularly slow. Yeah, and then usage examples, I just have it here. You can either basically pass it like a symbol, like thing, or you can also pass in a string as the first argument. And this is what will be displayed when you display a list of the like evaluation times for all of these like blocks in your configuration. Yeah, and then I have a like neat like little function here, like configure report times, that will report these times, whether in the order that it's encountered them, or you can have it like sort by like fastest to slowest, or like slowest to fastest, blah blah blah.
But
Yeah.
you mentioned you're no longer using this. What is it because you wanted it to be easier to copy and paste your code? Or what got you to shift back to the regular vanilla type of configuration?
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, as neat as it is, I didn't found it super useful for one thing because like I don't add or remove a ton of stuff to my Emacs configuration regularly. So that benefit of like if there is an error, then it wouldn't like cause an issue for the rest of my configuration. I didn't really find that very useful. And then the other thing that or my other potential concern is that the way I was like structuring things, I would put like all of the configuration, let's say for GNUs, in one of these blocks. But I wanted to like be able to break that down into like, for example, org mode sections more easily. So yeah, so far I just decided to like not use it. I know I could technically break those down into like in smaller blocks, but I haven't done that yet. So.
Yeah, Ihor says this configure macro looks a lot like good old use package, which you're not even using in the rest of your config. And I hear you about wanting to be able to split things into smaller blocks with more explanations in between them. So in my config, yeah, sure, I got the use package there to do the ensure and all that stuff, but I also have with val after load because I still want, the links and the screenshots in between.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and use package is awesome. Like I have used that in the past, especially when I was like using the straight.el package manager. It pairs nicely with it. But yeah, since then I found it a little bit like too magical for my tastes. Kind of like along the lines of like declaring an init file bankruptcy. At some point, I really wanted to understand every single line that I have in my Emacs configuration. And at the time, I didn't know a whole lot about macros or wasn't like very like well versed with them. So I just ditched it in favor of simply using, as you mentioned, with eval after load. And then that causes all that code to be like basically delayed, not evaluated immediately, but when that package is loaded. And then as to when to pull that package in, depending on like if I wanted right from the get-go of my Emacs starts, then I would require it. Otherwise, I had this, as you also mentioned earlier, this like kind of timer thing where if Emacs is idle for like, I don't know, 0.2 seconds or like 0.4 seconds, then go ahead and like require this package. So
Eeyore has a tip in the chat. Of course, Eeyore has an org way to do this. He says use package whatever config, and then he has a no web reference to the to the Babel blocks. So that's how he. And then he just has tangle no on the source block so that they don't actually get repeated. Anyway, you can look at it later when you go through. I'll send you the comments or whatever. But show us how you're actually configuring things since you're not using this.
Sure. Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll just jump ahead. Let's see. Oh, and then I just have another quick macro thingy here, like Bandali define keys or define key, which just wraps around like Emacs's define key. And but yeah, it's like nice, affords me the convenience of like defining multiple key bindings here. And Prod's version of this, I think, what is it? Prod keybind or Emacs keybind or something like that. Like he imposes the limitation that the keys should be like valid strings that can be passed to the KBD function, which is very, fair and valid. But I wanted to like not impose that, so that to keep the flexibility of using like define key directly. So the I guess consequences of that, as we can see, is we can pass in like the old representation of key bindings, like the vector or whatever syntax, which like Prots doesn't support by choice, whereas mine does. Yeah. Let's see. So yeah, for example, let's look at the theme, the Bandali theme, which is all about the appearance, I guess, of Emacs. Yeah, so I just have a conditional block where, if we're in a graphical environment, I'll just go ahead and load prot's Doric themes, specifically doric-oak, which is what we're seeing right now. I'm using, it's very beautiful, it's very subtle, and it uses like emphasis, like bolding and stuff to draw your eye to something instead of like using a million different colors, which I find pretty nice. Yeah, and then for example, here I set up some fonts. I use like this Sahel font for like Persian and Arabic text. I set on a color emoji font here, and this is like we get a kind of preview of what I do. Is it's like with eval after load faces, and then blah blah blah.
Ihor would like to point out that with eval after load is also a macro that calls another macro. So I'm just going to mention it because it's there.
Right. True.
Anyway, so yeah, so
that's true.
these are your fonts. This is your theme. This is great because everyone always asks, what theme is this? What font is this? All right. I like your text scaling tweaks that you're just about to go into, but you've changed it to global mappings.
Yeah. And I actually took this from Prot as well, and it makes a lot more sense. So by default, this like Control X, Control like plus minus blah blah blah. It only scales the text like for the current buffer only. But in newer version of Emacs, in Emacs 29, they also added commands to like adjust this globally, including like the mode line and all that stuff, which is usually what I want. For example, in this presentation or like when I'm sharing my screen right now, it scales everything up globally. So yeah, I just swapped these to like be the default, and then I add keybinds for like the just local variant in case I need to use that. Yep. And then here I have display fill column indicator. I don't know, maybe this is just me, but sometimes I'm kind of like OCD about keeping my text like lined up like at exactly, for example, the 70 characters column. I care a lot about that, especially if I'm like writing like code or text that I want to also like visually look nice. And I enable this. And let's see, I enable it for like prog mode or prog mode. So yeah, I guess if I, for example, do this like little like thin line that we see here, that's like the display fill column indicator. I used to have it like globally enabled, but then I found that a bit too much, so I just enable it with a hook in the modes that I want.
Yeah, and the theme makes it very subtle. It's just there, it's a reminder, don't go beyond this line. You can if you really want to, but it's, just try not to.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, let's see. And then my essentials. So this is where I like kind of configure a lot of like key behaviors of Emacs, all like built-in stuff for the most part, or things that are kind of key to my workflows. Like for example, like I always want to start with a scratch buffer, start the Emacs server if it's not running, and this is very useful, very helpful, so that then you can call into an existing Emacs process with like Emacsclient and have it like edit a file. I don't use it for anything fancy just yet. I believe Prot also mentioned in his video with you, Sasha, that he uses it for things like org capture to like spawn a new buffer in his existing Emacs session and things like that. You can do pretty cool things with it. But yeah, I just use it for being able to easily use my like Emacs as like editor and visual text editors. So yeah, this sets that up. Yeah, adding a fundamental mode hook. Again, I took this from Prot.
I was surprised by that because I was like, oh, there isn't a fundamental mode hook? Okay, that makes sense now.
Right. Yeah, there isn't a fundamental mode hook by design, but I still like in the past have found it like that I wanted that. For example, for this like display fill column indicator, when I had it enabled everywhere, I was like, it would be nice if I could at least disable it for fundamental mode. And at the time I didn't have this. I added this just recently. So if I decide to go back to using something like globally, but I don't want it in fundamental mode, then I can like disable it using like this. Yeah, and then some standard stuff like I prefer like spaces and like a tab with 4 characters. Visually indicate buffer boundaries. This is a little bit hard to see right now, but like here at the bottom left, you see like little down arrow and then the little top arrow. And let's see if I can. Okay.
Oh,
And
So
also
that,
here, for example, when it all fits in the view. Yeah.
that is cool. I was looking at that. I was
Yeah.
like, what does it do? And so that tells you you can still scroll up or you can still scroll down, and you don't have to look at the scroll bar to see where you are. It just says there's more there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it also helps like distinguish when there's a new line character at the end of the file or not. So here in this buffer there is, but if I delete that, you see like this indicator here changed shape. But if I go back and add the new line again, so yeah, that's also been very helpful for me because I edit configuration files, and some of these pieces of software are sensitive to like having a new line at the end of the file. Uh, so yeah, it's very helpful and useful for that.
I see. I would not have guessed that from the very short line in your config that turns that on. It's like one line: set key default, indicate buffer boundaries left, and yet it adds this nice little nuance to the way that fringe looks.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Perhaps I should like expound more on it at some point later to explain these things. But yeah, just this one line.
May I recommend screenshots?
Yes, you may. For sure. Yeah. Yeah, I will definitely do that as well. Yeah, because I'm also a bit of like a visual person. I like seeing like screenshots and videos. So yeah, I'll take that to heart and do that for my own configuration as well.
When I
Yeah.
post this, I'll probably I figured out how to have the transcripts and then have screenshots embedded into my transcript. I'll generate it automatically from the subtitle file. Our Emacs transcripts are going to get so fancy next year, but you can pull those screenshots and drop them into your config. It'll be great.
Nice. Yeah, for sure. Sounds good. Yeah, and then here I just like enabled some of these commands that are disabled by default. So yeah, it's useful, like especially like narrow to page, for example, or narrow to region. These are like commands where Emacs disables them by default, so that like if like newcomers don't accidentally hit them and like get very confused by what just happened. Um, it doesn't like disable them for good. It's just basically prompts you for confirmation. Are you sure you want to run this command? I'm sure at least about these commands, so I just like enabled them. Yeah, and then like something like, for example, override mode, which I never use and I don't want to accidentally enable, I just put it disabled so that if I do accidentally hit the keys, which might be, I don't know, something insert or whatever, then it'll like prompt me to make sure that I meant to do that.
That reminds me. I should probably turn that off for myself, and then you get a whole new keyboard shortcut you can use too.
Right. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I have like just a one line setting for like package.l, and in like Emacs 31, we will be getting a package review policy, which is very helpful. So if you do use package.el for installing packages from GNU-elpa, non-GNU-elpa, melpa, or whatever else, you can enable this, and then whenever you update your packages, you'll get a diff of like what changed in this like new revision of the package that you're downloading and you're about to enable, and you can presumably like say yes or no or whatever, at least see what's going on, which I find helpful.
But you're not using packages you mentioned, so you're just checking everything out and then git you're just git pulling whenever you feel like it.
Yeah. So right now I'm using like git pulls and git submodules, very manual. I put this here because I think it's generally like a very welcome change and like awesome new feature that I want to spread the word about. So maybe someone who's like looking at my config, they use package, and that's perfectly fine. So yeah, this is just here to like spread the word about it mainly, I guess. And if I start using package at some point myself in the future, then I will have this enabled. So yeah, let's see. Very quickly here, I like extend info directory list. So I like to, at least on some of my machines, use Emacs that I build from source directly in the like source repository of Emacs. Like just after doing make, I don't run make install. Even though it's very easy to do that, like you can install to a custom location by providing -- prefix when you're configuring Emacs. Sometimes I just find it more convenient for me to not do that and just run make and then exit and reopen Emacs. And for that kind of a setup, I just extend info directory list to include the info subdirectory of the Emacs source repository so that the like built-in Emacs info manuals will be available to me. So yeah. And then I use recentf for like tracking like recent revisited files. I bind it to like control C F R E for me to like get a pop-up like completion for visiting a recent file. It has completion, so if I like hit tab here, for example, we can see some of these like files or directories that I visited recently.
I see. And then you're adding the directory to it. So like, what does that let you do? Because I'm assuming you're already in there in the directory, but how does that change your recent f?
Right. So I need to think to remember this, but I think the point of this was that if I like open a project in like VC or like in Dured, then I would like that directory to also get added to my recentf like files list, because I think by default recentf only includes files, not directories.
Ah, I see. I
Yes.
see. So
Yeah.
it's
So
more
this
like,
way I
yeah, you're in it. You start up Magic or whatever, and then you move on to something else, but you want to be able to easily go back to it.
Yeah, for example, yeah, I like to like keep my recently visited directories in recentf as well. Yeah, because that's one of the main ways I jump between like projects and stuff, even though there is literally a built-in Emacs project mode, which I still use. But yeah, yeah, and then the only thing that I have here is basically check that like I don't want to add my home directory to the recently visited list. So the only thing that this function does is to like skip that if I'm like opening the home directory. That's about it. Yeah. And then here I configure like mouse and like scrolling behavior. So I want like Emacs to like scroll very like gently, like kind of like one line at a time. I think the default is that when you reach the end of the page, it'll like jump kind of like half a page down and then recenter. I don't remember default behavior because I don't use it very much, but yeah, this basically makes it very like predictable. Like for example, when I reach the edge of the page here and I press Control N, only like it'll only scroll like one line at a time instead of like, for example, jumping and then doing something like this. So
Oh yeah, mine doesn't do that. So it does that jumping thing. Okay, I see what you mean here. Interesting.
yeah. So you can tweak that with like scroll conservatively and then scroll preserve screen position, I believe. Yeah. Da-da-da-da. Yeah, and then I use auto revert, which is pretty helpful. So this will have Emacs watch, for example, files that are open in your buffers, and if they change on disk, Emacs will automatically refresh the buffer so that you get the latest version. The cool thing is you can press undo in one of these files that's been auto reverted so that you get the revision that was there right before the change. So I've used that sometimes as well.
Yeah, and sometimes auto follow also is nice for log files and things like that. But yeah, auto revert
Yeah,
mode
yeah,
is great.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, repeat mode is something that I've only like recently started using, especially with like my Emacs EXWM setup, using Emacs as my window manager. Like for example, if I hit Control XO, we see here in the echo area where it says repeat with O or capital O. So I can now only press O instead of like saying Control XO to do that multiple times. Like keymaps that have like support for this basically indicate that they want to be repeatable, can declare that, and then once you invoke like one of the keys in those keymaps, then you can like repeat it with just that single character. And for example, for my setup, I have that with my like exwm like workspace switching keys, so I can like easily go to the next and previous workspaces, many of them at a time, by just pressing like P and N instead of like, doing the shortcut multiple times.
And actually, if you don't mind like jumping ahead, the EXWM part of your config is fairly complex, and I think not a lot of people have a lot of experience seeing EXWM like in action. And I don't know whether you're like comfortable sharing you switching around to different workspaces, but if that is something that you
Yeah,
can do, like how are you
yeah,
doing all
sure,
this
sure,
awesomeness? I'm still
sure.
too scared to use
Yes.
EXWM myself. Stability. But that's a me problem, not an EXWM problem.
Yeah, EXW was pretty awesome. Like I used it back in like 2018, 19 for a while, and then I kind of moved on to like Sway and Wayland. But I don't know, it's something that like I feel like once you try it, you want to keep going back to it. So like recently, like this past month or so, I decided to give it an earnest try and like try to actually address any pain points that I've noticed. So it's like much more usable for me now, and I'm like sticking with it for now. I'm not a like Wayland hater, but I'm just saying, at least for now, I'm using EXWM, and I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay, what do you love about your
Um,
setup for that one?
or EXWM,
Yeah, yeah. Like you're doing a lot of rename
right? There's a couple of things,
buffers. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Yeah, let me think. There's a couple of things. So for the longest time, my Emacs EXWM configuration used the like super key as like kind of a prefix, which is like the Windows or like the one with the logo basically, to like switch workspaces, launch applications and such. Um, and at least the way that EXWM is right now, like it doesn't like the way you have to like add those global key bindings and kind of like slows down EXWM startup. And I had many such key bindings. So one thing that I did kind of recently is to like define a prefix map here, like Bandali prefix EXWM map. So, I bind all of the keys and commands that I want here. And then this helps me like really minimize what goes, what I'm telling EXWM, which is here. Like, for example, this is like how you set global keys with EXWM. And I just pointed to like my prefix map. So Control C X, and then any of those like letters and functions that we saw. That's kind of annoying. I still use the super key here, but I have it like super X and like super comma. So on the left-hand side of my keyboard, X is right next to super. So I can kind of hit it in like one go with like one motion, almost as a single key with like these two fingers. And then on the right side of my keyboard, I don't have a super key, but I have a control key that I remap to super. So on the right side, I do like super comma with like these two fingers. So it's still like very convenient for me to like basically invoke those commands. And pairing this up with like repeat mode, as we can see just here actually, then I can hit like super comma and then like P, N, or like HJKL many times to like switch like workspaces or like shift focus to like, different windows and stuff without having to hit that kind of annoying like super X or like super comma repeatedly. So yeah.
That sounds really cool.
But
I
yeah,
should look into that. Sorry, quick aside, Blaze would like to compliment you on your awesome audio setup. It sounds like you're in the room with him. Apparently, I sound like him on speakerphone, but your audio setup is like top notch, apparently. But that looks like a Blue
thank you,
Yeti, so I had to
appreciate it.
like find out what's going on. Like, what microphone are you using? Oh,
It is indeed a Blue Yeti.
yeah, yeah. So I just have to like ask him for like, hey, wait, okay, what kind of boom mic? I would, anyway, we'll do that all offline because it's not Emacs related.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
just a Blue Yeti. Yeah, I turned down the gain kind of. I used to like have gain higher, but then it picks up more noise from like around the room or like around the house. So I turn down the gain a lot, and then I like get close to the mic so that it only captures my voice. That helps.
Okay. I'm gonna need the boom, otherwise I'm like squished into that corner. All right. So you were doing repeat map before I said like, ooh, let's talk about XWM because that you've got cool stuff there.
Yeah, and I can continue like talking about EXLM. There's a lot here. Um, yeah, so like I have, let's see, like super space, super comma space. I bind it to like async shell command to like use as my simple like little like D menu like thing for like launching applications. But some of these things like browsers, I still like do them frequently enough, and I use different browser profiles. So I just define a new like key map with like, so I can like basically one shot like launch Chromium or like Firefox in a specific browser or like an incognito window and such. So yeah, I just do like super XB, and then, for example, C to launch Chromium and all that stuff. So I found this pretty convenient. Speaking of key bindings, before I get down this, let's see if I can find Control CH. Yeah, I think this is just before my exwm setup. This is I'm pretty proud of this. I love this, and it really goes to show like how awesome Emacs is and like extensible it is. Let's see. So as we know, these various like help commands and describe commands are on the like control H prefix, but some of them are not bound. Like for example, find library or like describe phase, and some of these I use like pretty frequently. I was like really having trouble like coming up with descriptive enough key bindings or like short enough key bindings for all of them. So like I put some of them here, for example, like control CFL for like find library. But yeah, I can't do that for all of them. So what I did was just do control CHA or like control CHD. And what this will do is basically, if I show that, it basically opens up MetaX, fills in describe dash, and then I can just type, for example, like face, and that's it. So it basically opens up the mini buffer for me, pre-fills it with the string that I want, and I can type what is it that I'm looking for. And I found this to be like better than like trying to bind a million different like key bindings for like describe this and that, apropos this and that, find this and that. So yeah, and the way that we do that is to just use like a mini buffer with setup hook, and you just have a little lambda to like insert the string that you give it, and then you like invoke it. So
Yeah,
this is pretty cool.
when I saw that in your config. I was like, I'm gonna steal that, because pre-filling the mini buffer but still letting you do stuff with it is such a powerful thing. Not just for like completing the command itself, but even for when you're using the command, but you want to do something with the input before, but you don't want to do it like all the way, send it in and submit it right away. You want to actually do something with it after you insert it. So great tip.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it's pretty useful. It's pretty nice. Yeah. And then back to like the Emacs or EXWM stuff. So before I used to like, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I forgot whether I was muted or unmuted.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, so for the longest time, I had like 10 default like EXWM workspaces on startup, and that can like slow things down a little bit. So I found that, okay, I don't really use all 10 workspaces always. So I set it to 5. So I get 5 workspaces initially, but I still bind keys here. Like if we go down, let's see here. So that here, like I define those keys for like all the way from like let's say from 0 to 9 for all 10. And then if I try to like switch to a workspace that doesn't exist, then EXWM will just go ahead and create it for me. Yeah, so I found that pretty cool. You can like create workspaces on the fly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw that it moves your current window there too. So that's just like, okay, let's move it to workspace number 2 or whatever. Very cool.
Yeah. I have like keys or convenience keys for like moving some window to some workspace. Yeah, it's nice. Let's see. Yeah, so these are just my key bindings. I use like HJKL here for like switching windows, and I also have a like ZSA Voyager like split keyboard, like ergonomic keyboard, and I have like custom. I can basically customize it indefinitely or infinitely. For example, I don't really have a super key on the first layer. What I have is a key that will do like the super X like thingy, basically my prefix. So that's like the last missing piece, is that if I'm at home and if I have this keyboard with me, then I just hit one key and then that's it. I'm in my prefix. But even if not on the laptop, the super X or like the super comma are still like easy enough for me to hit it with like one hand. So
Now I'm jealous, and I definitely want, like, okay, assign my prefixes to their own keys. Very tempting. I've started using the numpad because my laptop has one, and I'm like, I only use the
nice.
numpad rarely, but we all need more keys.
Yes, yes, yeah. Like ergonomic keyboards are pretty nice, especially like these ones. Like for example, the ZSA ones where you can put QMK on it, the QMK firmware. Yeah, it's basically you can define keys like in a C file. Um, I can actually show that maybe. Let's see. Oops. QMK firmware. Oops, sorry. QMK firmware keyboards. ZSA Voyager keymaps. Yeah, Bandali, and then keymap.c.
Is this in your
And
repository
I'm
somewhere?
gonna.
For the, you know.
This is actually right. It's in a different repository, but it's still on like git.calar.org, like next to my configs repository. You can find this as well. But if I
Excellent.
go like,
For
yeah,
all you
make this
keyboard
slower
geeks,
a little
perfect. Yeah, yeah.
smaller. Yeah, you can like define keys here, like and have like different layers, like the base layer, and then this is like you can define a key to like switch between different layers and put some of the keys there anyway. So yeah, it's a whole rabbit hole in and of itself. And prod also uses a like split ergonomic keyboard, and it really does help like if you're typing for like long periods of time. I actually had these for a while and I wasn't using them too much, but I started like slowly getting some pain in my wrists and here. So I was like, okay, I have the keyboard, might as well like put it to good use, and I've started using it. So
Okay, so most of your keyboard shortcuts come off that, kind of super X or so Control C, something, and then you have a long prefix sequence, and you just remember everything, or you use your or use the completion to do the like pre-fill some of it and then fill in the rest of the command. Uh, I
yeah,
guess
yeah, yeah.
that's how it works. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, like pretty much all my like window management related keys are on this like super X like prefix and that I'm showing here. And then I have a few other ones which I think I showed earlier. Uh, is it this one? Anyway, yeah, I bind a few like general keys like outside of like the super X thing, like Control CEI, or for example, I have Control CEE for like eval last expression. I do that a lot, so it's like easy to hit that, like making frames or like deleting frames. Yeah.
I love how Emacs uptime is something used frequently enough that you have a keyboard shortcut for it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm sometimes curious to see how long has my Emacs session been running. Yeah. So anyhow, yeah, to continue with like the exwm stuff, let's see. So yeah, this is just some key bindings I define here. And I mean, it's all Emacs Lisp, right? It's amazing. You can like map C over like whatever sequence and like create key bindings like that. Only with Emacs we can do things like that. So yeah, I just love it. Let's see. Yeah, I still keep like these three other keys for like raising and lowering the volume and like toggling mute off of that prefix and like just directly on my keyboard, like hitting it directly in the like exwm input global keys, because I do that very, very frequently. So yeah, but I also have like scripts that I can invoke. Like actually, I should do keycast. So yeah, I can do like invoke the prefix with like semicolon. I can set my volume here, adjust it here, like type in what volume I want, or like with like the single quote, I can enter like a value for like the screen brightness. I like these things to be like exact depending on the lighting in the room. I have like preferred like brightness values of like, okay, 50 or like 12 or 10 that I manually adjust. I guess it's a poor man's version of having something with like a light sensor that can pick up and adjust automatically. I do it manually. Yeah. So you just muted yourself again.
You're just probably this close to writing the Emacs Lisp that takes your webcam image and then adjusts your light. But I think Prot was also saying he likes to do the lighting changes manually as well, because warmer colors versus cooler colors and all of that stuff. Anyway, so you have all these buttons that EXWM listens to and it can launch various things for. That's a lot of things.
Right. Yeah. It's Yeah, those are pretty cool. And then exwm has this like lovely feature called input simulation keys, where you can basically use it to bring Emacs key bindings to other applications, like Firefox or whatever. And yeah, it's mind blowing when you try it for the first time. Like for example, I bind Control B to like just hit the left like arrow on the keyboard. Um, and it does that, so I can like define all of these commands that I'm using or used to using in Emacs, so I can get them in Firefox or like other applications as well. Realistically, it's mostly Firefox. It's like the only other program that I spend any reasonable amount of time outside of Emacs. So
Let me point out this very important one that you have there. Under selection, cut, copy, paste, I see a Control W input simulation key. So this is for all the people who have accidentally closed their browser tab while trying to copy text. This is how you solve that problem. Use
yes,
exwm and use
exactly.
exwm input simulation keys, and you don't have to accidentally close your browser tabs again. Blaze asks, hey, what about time since last save? Or do you have some kind of autosave magic? Like, like
Um,
in reference to the uptime thing, right? You have this thing that shows you uptime, but I was wondering if you have a kind of an autosave thing.
I don't think I have anything for autosave, but I have like this habit of like I save everything pretty regularly. Um, yeah, so I've never really needed that feature, but I'm sure Emacs has something where you can, at the very least, just very dumb, like simple implementation of has it been idle for like, I don't know, 1 minute, then just do like a save buffer. You can roll your own. So yeah, but I don't have anything.
All right, I'm getting really tempted now to try out EXWM, even if it's just for those global keyboard remapping thingies. How is it for Windows that you gotta have floating? And I feel like it's very good at handling tiling things, but how is it for sometimes the apps kind of really want a floating window?
Right. Yeah. So you can toggle any window to be floating or not, and you can also actually we're actually just looking at it here.
Ah,
EXW manage
perfect.
configurations. Yeah. So like to match on like the instance name or like the class name of a window that you can get from xprop to automatically make that tiling. Like for example, if I do like my prefix and then capital T, it launches a floating terminal for me here. Um, and like if I go back to where I set it up, like I just launch xterm with like the name argument. This is like where you can set the instance, and I just put any string you can want, like floating, for example. And then here in my configuration, yeah, I just check that if the instance name is floating, then I'll go ahead and like, float the window. Simple as that.
All right, this is
Um,
starting to look exceedingly tempting. Blaze says, "Lol, I save everything regularly." So he's one of those people. You don't want to compulsively hit Control X, Control S.
yeah, I do that a lot. I don't know. It's just me. But
It's
yeah,
all good.
it's yeah. Yeah, and then I don't know, exwm is awesome. You can also like put like local simulation keys, like application specific simulation keys, depending on like the application, like terminals, for example, or like Zathura. This is a PDF like viewer um, to like have like application specific custom key bindings. How cool is that? Like for example, if I'm in Xterm or something, or like the Mate terminal, heading Control C like twice basically, it'll just send the Control C key to the terminal. Because the one thing with EXWM is that you can set it to capture a couple of like Emacs prefixes like Control X or Control C. So the application by default doesn't see it because Emacs captures it. But this is like one of those like mechanisms by which you can send a key through. Let's see. The other thing is you can set it like exwm-input-send-next-key. So the default is Control C, Control Q, but I just bind it to like Control Q, and I, for example, can do Control Q, Control T to send Control T to the underlying application. So that's the other thing. Yeah, and then let's see. So this thingy here, I enable exwm and I add this rename hook, and all it does is basically to add the window titles to the buffer, like that I can see on the mode line. But like as long as it's within like a certain reasonable length, like for example, I have 25 characters. If it's longer than that, it will just put ... So yeah, that's all the purpose of that. Let's see, like for example, if I launch xterm, yeah, it appears there. Yeah, the perfect example is actually here on the right-hand side. On the mode line, we see like Firefox ESR Emacs conf chat. It's a bit long, so it just puts the ... there. So that's all that does.
Yeah, now being able to use Emacs to manage the tiling of these things instead of my having to like fiddle with like alt dragging things to snap nicely into buffers. Yes, very cool stuff. EXWM, gotta try it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, let's see. Here I launch like dunst if the executable is installed for like getting notifications in EXWM. I think there's at least 1 or 2 Emacs specific packages that implement like a simple notification like daemon or backend so that Emacs itself can handle that. But I found dunst good enough for my use cases coming from like an i3 Sway like tiling window manager background. I just reuse that. So yeah, I just start the process, keep a handle of it in this like dunst process variable here. And this thing I discovered recently, it's cool. Like using like set process query on exit flag, you can basically have Emacs not ask you if you want to like exit Emacs if that process is still running. It'll just kill it without confirming with you. So just a little convenience.
That is also cool. Yeah. Just a heads up. I have about 15 minutes before the kiddo runs out because she'll be done with school then. Even just the XWM part, as you know, and other things that you've shown us in the config have been super awesome. But are there other things in the next 15 minutes that you would love to show people so that they can see how it works in practice?
Right. Let's see. One thing I will just mention EXWM, one more thing, and then I'll go check that is, I think this is kind of recent in the recent years, EXWM xsettings. And this allows you to dynamically on the runtime change some of these things that you would normally set in like an X resources file. Like for example, fonts, is it? Yeah, like these kind of settings that was especially very commonplace, like back when Wayland wasn't a thing or wasn't very popular. You would set some of these font settings here. With EXWM xsettings, you can do this dynamically. And what's awesome about that is it also lets you hook into, like, for example, if like your screen configuration changes, so like if you plug in a monitor or like unplug it, then you can, run whatever xrender RNR command to set it up, and then also adjust those settings. And the main thing I use it for is to change the DPI setting. So the thing with like X11 or Xorg is, unfortunately, there's no per monitor DPI. There's like one global DPI. But I found that in my high DPI laptop screen, if I set it to, instead of the full resolution, to be like 1920 by 1080p, then with the default like DPI of 96 works just fine with my external monitor as well. So like all this like little hook here does by calling into this function is, if I'm plugging in my external monitor, lower the resolution, lower the DPI, and then like if I unplug it, go back to like the high thing. So just love this.
That's great. We're definitely not going to demonstrate that because plugging and unplugging monitors is not a good thing for screen sharing. But that sounds really cool because
Yep.
when things change, you can actually get your system to adapt to the changes for you.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah. Let's see. There's so much more to talk about. I'm slowly getting back into org mode again, and because for the longest time I didn't use it, and I just used like Markdown for like for my website as well. But I found that it's kind of limited. Like for example, I was using a Markdown implementation that was written in C, and I can't easily customize it. Whereas with org, I can hook into or like create my custom like HTML exporter backend that's a derivative of Ox HTML, even if I don't necessarily like the defaults or like the settings for Ox HTML. So I just recently started writing a new backend called like Ox, like BHTML for Bandali HTML. It's just a boilerplate. I don't have much there yet, but that's the idea. I love how you can hook into all of these different aspects of Emacs and get it to do exactly what you want. Yeah, so that's cool. Let's see. I had written some things about the prompt for this meeting. Yeah, so I talked about that stuff briefly. Then mini buffer setup. Things that I love about my setup is that it's kind of portable, simple. People can easily copy things from it if they want. It's kind of self-contained. And that was a kind of a big thing a while back when I wanted to use my configurations on a couple of like work machines, and these don't have direct like outbound internet access. So I couldn't do things like installing packages with like ELPA because that's done over HTTP. So yeah, I use sub modules now. Yeah, I recently began like documenting like my setup, very much inspired by like Prot and Sasha and others. The things that I'm looking forward to like tweaking next is the mode line. So this is kind of basically the default mode line of Emacs. A couple versions ago, they added a setting for like compacting the mode line, which improves a lot of the extraneous like white space in it, which is great. But it's still, there's too much information. And like if you like use multiple windows, or like even especially if you use exwm, all of those things like the date or like the battery get repeated in all of the windows. So I'm looking forward to like doing my my mode line in such a way that, for example, it shows most of those things only in the mode line of the active window. Yeah, and Prod actually has an excellent video about that, where he shows how you can create your own custom mode line. So
I've also been
yeah,
tempted
I'm
to
looking.
start using the header line too, because that's another thing that you can put information in.
Right. Yep.
And
Header line is awesome too.
the display-buffer-alist is particularly powerful because you're combining it with exwm. So it'd be interesting to see how you can manage windows and applications and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And especially just like how we saw in today's video call, and also a call that I had with Prod recently. Like, for example, if I open like a describe variable or something, it'll like by default use the right area of the screen right now where like our video is. So it reuses that. So I'm also looking forward to like reading more about and configuring display buffer A-list. I'd like to figure out some like TRAMP slowness. Like I recently tried using it again. It's awesome. You can seamlessly like open files like SSH into other machines and edit files there. But I don't know, it's kind of slow. So I want to see, aside from the latency, you know, the physical limit of the latency because of the distance, is there anything slowing it down? I think I read like in the TRAMP FAQ that maybe trying to disable like VC mode or VC detection, like for remote connections might help speed it up, or at least having it do only Git, for example, because by default, Emacs's VC has support for like Mercurial, like CVS, SVN, Git, RCS even. So
Anything anyone has ever wanted to use in the last 40 years. Here we go.
yep, yep.
I saw in your
Yeah, and
TRAMP
then
config actually that you were doing something with the SSH configs, and I'd never come across that, so I was like, oh, that's something I should look into later.
right,
For like
yeah,
completion. Yeah.
yeah. I don't remember the specifics, but yeah, it's all out there. Yeah, feel free to like look into it. Yeah, and so especially with this like EXWM setup, I still use like Xterm sometimes, and I have the Emacs EAT terminal, which is like an terminal emulator written in Emacs Lisp. So if I launch it right now, it's awesome, and it actually is very powerful, and it's a properly capable terminal emulator. It's just can be a little bit slow. It is slower than Xterm, but it's still a lot faster than whatever Emacs has built in. So this is pretty cool. But yeah, I don't want to like use it a lot, and I kind of started testing like delegating more things or using more like async shell command to just basically open this prompt and then do like whatever I want. Like anyway.
I've also heard
Um,
things about Ghost TY? Ghost TTY? Anyway, so that's another thing to
right,
look into. Yeah.
right.
Uh, Yes, so
Yeah,
Panish says with Emacs 31 there's a new variable where you can hide the minor modes in the mode line. Pikal says it's mode line collapse minor modes. And Panish also says, I personally use the Minions package by Tarsius, and it has some nice features in addition to the built in features. So other people are tinkering around with their mode lines as well. We have a lot of
nice.
interesting things. Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And then I don't know. I think maybe you touched on something a couple minutes ago that I was gonna go back to, but I
Tramp,
forget. So I'm just
Tramp SSH completion out of your configs. I was like, there's a Tramp S config in here that I've never used, and that sounded interesting. Yeah, it's a Tramp
let's
parse S
see.
config,
Ah, right. Yeah. So
which of course we're not going to look
actually,
at
I'm
because
pretty
it's
sure.
like private stuff. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, you're welcome to try this. I'm pretty sure actually I took this from the Tramp manual itself. Um, so, and it's one of those things where it's like set and forget, like I don't remember. Um, but yeah, it's here. There was something else that I also wanted to show, but I forget. Let me see if looking at the outlines will remind me or if I will see it.
And that's one of the things I love about literate configuration is, just kind of look at the structure and skim it and try to find something with keywords and orderless and all that stuff.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
And
Let's see.
people will have access to your full configuration because it is in your repository, and you have that lovely HTML export for it as well. So if people want to follow up, they can go through that at length. At some point, you're going to add some more screenshots and possibly even video clips to it. Yeah, so that's there at git.keller.org. And yes,
Yeah. So yeah, this is my configurations repository. And if you go here to like tree view and then .emacs.d, this is like the org file. And then I also export all of those like individual components into like this Lisp subdirectory. So yeah, all that stuff is here. The QMK thingy that was mentioned. Oh, I wanted to mention FFS. Okay, I'll do that as
yeah,
well.
what's up with
The
that?
QMK.
I was trying to find information. It was like, there's no package. It's not like, what is this thing? Ah.
It's form feed slides, and it's gonna soon be a package. I was actually talking to Prod about it, and I'm hoping to like submit it to like for inclusion in GNU Alpha within I don't know, the next couple of weeks. It's basically very similar to Prod's logos package, and turns out we have both had the same kind of idea at the exact same time in 2022, and we both used it for our LibrePlanet 2022 presentation. Of course, Pratt being like the diligent person that he is, he like polished his like work, documented it, put it on GNU Alpha. I still haven't got around to doing it yet, but better late than never. Um, yeah, let's see. I can maybe show a quick demonstration of that. So let's see. Anyway, so if I go to my website sources and net beyond web, so I had the LibrePlanet talk a couple years ago, and so what FFS is basically, it looks for a particular character. In this case, or like the default case, it's the page delimiter Control L, which you can insert by hitting Control Q, Control L. And it basically then designates each of these areas as like one slide. So very, very simple, like slideshow that you don't even have to use org or outline or any like other major or minor mode. So if I launch FFS, it will, by default, it's in a mode where like it binds a couple of convenience keys like P and N to like going to the next and previous slide. You can hit E to edit a slide, similar to like org src, and then make your changes and all of that. And then you can start a presentation by hitting S. And this will, it has hooks for like, for example, bumping up the font size or whatever, hiding the mode line. Like I can toggle the mode line by hitting M here. Let's see. I can also toggle the cursor, like to make the cursor visible or not. So yeah.
Nice,
And then I'm
very,
just hitting
yeah.
P and N.
Very simple, very minimalist.
Thanks.
You have a file, you've got page markers, and that's all you got.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. And then the neat thing that it has, that I also liked implementing at the time, is it has a like speaker notes feature. So you can designate a file as being like the speaker notes, where it has the same like structure separators with Control L, but you can like type your notes or here whatever, and you can basically open these in two different windows or two different frames on separate displays, and then whichever one of those you advance the slides, like P and N, it also does the other one. So
That's brilliant. I was looking for a way to do that kind of so I can pretend to know what I'm talking about when I have something on screen, but I, can just read my notes or even just remember what points I wanted to make. So this is great. You
right.
have speaker notes. You've got the main screen. They can be in two different frames. You can have your frame, that you're sharing, and your frame that you're not sharing that has all of your cheat sheets. Excellent. And on
Yeah.
that note, in
Yeah.
about 1 minute, the kid is going to come running out and want to, have snack and all that stuff. Thank you so much for walking through parts of your config. There is more, and everyone who wants to find out more can go check out your setup. I have a great many things that I want to try out. Starting from EXLDM to the little things like figuring out a boom mic setup because apparently your audio setup is making me very jealous. But yes, yes, thank you for doing this. I'm gonna post the transcript and the chapters and all. Like I have a chapter every minute. It's going to be a long yes, but it
Awesome.
was good. Lots of cool stuff. Thank you again.
Sounds great. And yeah, you're very welcome. And thank you so much for having me as well, Sasha. I'm very like delighted to be here. Especially, I think just by chance, I think I'm the first person you're doing this with after like the long hiatus. So that's an extra like honor from you. Yay. But yeah,
Schedule. Yeah,
it's
yeah,
been fun. And
yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. We could like go on. I could go on for hours. Like I'm sure we both could. But yeah, yeah, this has been
I
fun. Thank you.
if we wanted to go on for hours, Prot has more flexible scheduling, so he can chat with people for 2 hours and stuff, and you already have like your conversations going on with him. But I unfortunately have a small mammal who's like 10 years old and listening very much, and likes to not let me concentrate for very long. But thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for the chat, and thank you also Stream for all the interesting questions. I will send you all the information and update the post, and we'll see you all on Thursday. I've got another chat, so all of a sudden all these Emacs chats are going to happen. Thanks. Oh, and you said you're happy to be on the hook for doing another Emacs conf this year, right?
Yes, you can hold
Yes.
me to that. There will be another Emacs conf, and I will be active in it. So
All right then. I'm gonna end our broadcast. Thanks everyone. Bye.
thank you. Bye bye.